Welcome to the Pine Ridge Hiking Club April 2021 Hike Talks. We have two presentations, the Tongariro crossing in New Zealand and father and son hiking in Bolivia.
Hello, everybody. My name is David Dieter. Most of you don't know me. I've only been a member of the Pine Ridge Hiking Club for about 3.5 months, but you probably know my partner, Lee Wakeland. She's making me into a hiker. I'm mainly a cyclist, but I did do this hike 11 years ago. Some of you are familiar with it, and I'd like to share it with you. It's the Tongariro Alpine Crossing, which I did in March of 2010. Oh, yes. I will try to get going, dear.
Okay, that looks promising.
All right. Here we
You
go.
just need to move your cursor to the middle of the right and you should be able to see a
I'm
forward
good.
arrow. Yeah.
Here we go. This hike used to be known as the Tongariro Crossing, but in 2007, the New Zealand government changed the name to the Tongariro Alpine Crossing because the year earlier, 2 hikers died on the trek. 5,000 that year. We are going over a mountain, so you're getting into some very severe and changeable weather conditions. Very high wind, wind chill, rapid changes in temperature, poor visibility in cloud or fog, possible snow conditions depending on where you're hiking, because people do hike this all year long. So the route is marked with poles occasionally, but they can become unsightable if the weather is bad, and it's easy to go off the track, and there's an awful lot of cliffs, as you will see. So the Alpine name trampers that this is in fact a high altitude hike. It's located on North Island in New Zealand, and in the center of the island is a large freshwater lake, Lake Taupo. To the north is the city of Taupo, and it's a short 15 or 20-minute ride south to Tongariro National Park. The Tongariro crossing occurs in this park, and I've marked it here in yellow to show the trek. Tongariro National Park is a World Heritage Site. It has 2 distinctions to earn that. 1, the natural beauty, and 2, the cultural significance to the Maori people, who are the native people in New Zealand. The crossing has a very moon-like atmosphere, and you are crossing over an active volcano. The Tongariro Alpine Crossing is New Zealand's best one-day tramp, and it's considered to be one of the top 10 day hikes in the world. Now, perhaps the third distinction for this national park is the fact that the Lord of the Rings was shot, for the most part, right in this park. And behind me, in this section of the park, the beginning of the second movie, The Twin Towers, with Frodo and the group clambering over these mountains, and much of what you will see later in the presentation. We are going over the Tongariro mountain. It actually consists of 12 cones. A few of them will be mentioned in this talk, including the Red Crater and the Central Crater and Tamari. Most of the hikes start here in the west in the Mangatpopo parking lot, and the hike first goes east to Soda Springs, then up to the Emerald Lakes, where we make a turn, and then the decline or the climb down the mountain goes north to the finish here in the Ketatahi Road. As you can see here, the relief shows that we start at 1,100 meters and we climb to an elevation of 1,900 meters at the high point at Red Crater. The descent takes us to the 700-meter level at the end. So in essence, on the decline, we are dropping 1.2 kilometers vertically. We arrived at about 8:30 in the morning in the Mangatko Popo car park. We had a private driver, a friend, drop us off, and then approximately 7.5 hours later picked us up at the other end. Public transportation from Taupo brings people here by bus or cab or van, and they're constantly coming during the day in the morning to bring them to the start, and in the afternoon they keep coming to pick people up at the end. We arrived at 8:30 in the morning because it was a wet and we didn't feel like starting all that early. We were a group of 3. This is myself as a younger man 11 years ago. This is my friend Willard from around Niagara Falls. And this is Ross the Kiwi, who was taking us on the route. You notice the Canadians are bare-legged and the Kiwi has his long johns on. Now, the trek takes about between 7 and 9 hours to complete. And all trampers start in the morning. Now, in New Zealand, you're not called a hiker, you are a tramper. You don't go on hikes, you go on tramps. Now, most people start between 7 and 9 in order to complete the walk before supper time or the evening. That means there's always going to be a large concentration of people on the track. But this will spread out during the day for various reasons, fatigue, breaks, stops. And at any given time, there's probably about 300 to 400 trampers on this track. You saw from the earlier slide that there can be about 65,000 people a year who do this, and people do it in all seasons, including winter hikes. Stage 1, starting from the Mount Gatpo car park to Soda Springs. Soda Springs is a natural spring, and the first section we're walking along the Mangatpopo stream, which originates from Soda Springs. As you can see from this picture here, it starts out nice and flat and a nice even stroll. We were decked out in rain gear because we had a rainy day. I'm going to go to this relief often to show where we are in the trek. This is the first part, and we're going up to Soda Springs, which is going to be the last of the public facilities before you cross over the volcano. That flat part soon ends, and we find ourselves climbing rougher and steeper grounds. The valley to our left is the Mount Gatpo stream running down there. We have boards along the way to kind of keep the trail from washing away, which you could very easily do on a day like this. We get nice views down into the valley with the stream plunging over various waterfalls along the way. But you can see it's not necessarily easy going in the rain because you are scrambling over large rocks, and now the soil is muddy. So as we walk foot, and it's more like scrambling than having a nice hike. You can see it's quite misty and moist. But it's a joy to be out in the weather and in feeling the fresh air of the mountains. When we climb out of the hills, we reach a boggy plateau, and you can see in the plateau here, you can see clumps of lava scattered about. There's the people who've made this trek have really got some nice walkways and trails and bridges all the way along to make it easier for the trampers. And soon we've reached Soda Springs after about an hour and a quarter. Now you can see the large group of people here resting and making use of the facilities. And there was, in fact, more than one school hike with class loads of probably students in grades between, I'd say, 8, 9, and 10, young teenagers. We decided we weren't going to stay here very long. We wanted to put some space between us and the crowd, so we took the picture and we moved on. Stage 2 has a climb. It's called the Devil's Staircase, and you will see why. We're proceeding to the South Crater. Now, signs as we're leaving are warning us of volcanic hazards. We are crossing an active volcano, and the volcanoes here have erupted a couple of times in the last couple of decades. So they actually warn you what to do in case of an eruption. Here we are. This is Willard starting to climb the bottom of the Devil's Staircase. And you can see the trail wending its way up. It's clearly marked, passing through all of the lava fields. The clouds, the mist is starting to lift, and we're actually starting to see some nice views down the valley, kind of lifting our spirits somewhat. I've actually got a smile on my face. The Devil's Staircase, long, long, long climb, and you can see the people stretched out behind us. The mist is rising, but it's still a very mystical and magical view. We are going through piles of lava fields, and you can see the big clumps of the aggregates of the lava. And the valley is looking all the more beautiful behind us. The mist is rising, always beautiful in the mountains. And we're still climbing the Devil's Staircase, heading up. Now this is a view, we started way back down here, and you can see how our altitude is climbing. Up above us, we're going up here to the South Crater, so we still have a bit of a climb to go. On the left of us is the highest peak on Mount Tongariro, and to the right of it is Mount Garuho. So we actually go through this little valley here, which is called the Saddle. Another view down the valley. Pause for pictures. These guys kept leaving me behind because I had to stop and take all the pictures. So while they're walking at a regular pace, I'm sprinting half the time. So here, after 2.5 hours, we had climbed 500 meters, and we're now almost at the South Crater. We stopped for a drink, a little snack, and you can see the sky is starting to turn blue, and you can see our shadow on the ground. The sun is coming out. This is Mount Garoho. You can see it last erupted in 1975, and you can still see the reddish tinges on the lip. Here's, we had a little break. Now this volcano is noted for another reason. It was used as a stand-in for the fictional Mount Doom in Peter Jackson's film, The Lord of the Rings. So it's received worldwide exposure for that. This is a sequence of 3 pictures I put together in a panorama to show the mountain and going back down into the distance. Now, stage 3, we're now going to come off the saddle here in the distance, and we're going to drop down into the South Crater, and we're going to have a nice flat walk, and then we're going to climb up here, heading towards Red Crater. So this is our stage 3 climb up to the highest point of the hike. So the South Crater is a lovely flat expanse to give our legs a little break. The highest peak on Mount Tongariro is off to our left. You can see that all the way along the trek, there are these poles that kind of mark where the trail is. In foggy or misty conditions, it's kind of hard to see the path ahead of you with all of the rocks. You can see it's almost camouflaged here. So there's a hope that people may be able to see these posts. Now, when we reached this point, the wind was ferocious. Now, Willard is posing here. You can see his legs are really braced against the wind. Now, when we traded places and he took a picture of me, I took my hat off my head and held it because I figured it was going down that valley. And I was braced firmly because I'm sort of afraid of heights. And I can't imagine what this fellow is doing out here. I figured if I walked out there, my heart would be in my throat. But that is just a beautiful view behind them. Wonderful place to have your picture taken. Lots of people paused here, took off their gear, had a drink and relaxed and looked out into the valley below. You can see how easily if you get off track, you're going over a cliff and that's the end of you. Looking back over the South Crater, where we trekked along here. And looking on the other side. Now, this next section, as far as I was concerned, is the steepest, most slippery, and the most dangerous. And because it had been raining that morning, the soil was still wet. And you reach the stage where there's a sharp drop off to your left and a sharp drop off to your right, and you're going up this steep, slippery ridge. I actually reached the point where I was practically crawling, putting my hands into the foothold ahead of me. So I got a picture of Ross, and I got a picture of Willard, and then I put my camera away and I crawled for the next part, so there's no picture of that scramble. And when we get up to the top here, the sign says we're about 3.5 hours from the beginning, and still 3.5 hours to go. We pause for the picture, and we continue the climb up here to the summit, the 1900 meter level. This is Red Crater off to our right. So here's the ascent to the highest point. And here is the lip and the rim of Red Crater overlooking the Oture Valley and the Rangipo Desert behind it. So the panoramic view, you kind of feel like you climb Mount Everest. Off in the distance, you're going to see Blue Lake. We're heading for that. We're going to walk around behind it. And after we do that, the descent will start down the other side. For now, the next stage is a short stage. We go from the top of Red Crater, we go down to the Emerald Lakes. You can see some of them behind us. It's only a little over a 200 meter drop, but the descent is down loose scoria. So basically, you're finding that the soil beneath your feet is flowing as you go down. So it moves with you. Some people find this very difficult to descend. I like this picture of the people snaking down, particularly the next one. When I look at this picture, it makes me think of the Alaskan gold rush, when you got pictures like this of all the gold miners going up the mountain, carrying their pack sacks. Here are the people coming down. If I look back over the South Crater, you can see this dark piece here. This is the old lava flow from the 1975 eruption of Red Crater, which is off to the left. The emerald lakes, well, they're multicolored. You can see here's a yellowish green one, and these are brighter green ones. The color is from the minerals that's leached into the water from the surrounding rocks. We go down, and then you see from the emerald lakes, our trek will continue in this direction up to Blue Lake. This is a lovely place. This is just before the halfway park. Everybody is stopping here for their lunch and a break, and the photographs. And the views are absolutely spectacular. So we have come from west to east, and we're on the turning point here on the corner, and you can see we're going to go up past Blue Lake and then start our descent. The sun is out, we've stripped off our rain gear, and we've now put on our cooler jackets. Stage 5 is taking us from Emerald Lakes to Blue Lake. There's the path on the right side. We first have to descend from here and drop into Central Crater once again. Now, part way across here, there's a cairn. This officially marks the halfway point distance-wise in the crossing. The crossing is 19.4 kilometers. So this halfway point is the midpoint for distance, and it's practically the midpoint for time, about 3.5 hours to here. Looking back, there's the red crater, the view of Central Crater, and up ahead, we finally reach Blue Lake, and it is just divine with the sun shining on it. The waters are just a wonderful crystalline blue. The water is so pure and clean, but it's the sacred lake to the Maori. And in fact, trampers are told no swimming, no eating around the periphery, show it the respect that the Maori have for it, take your pictures and move on. Looking back from the way we've come, one last look before we turn to start the descent. Now, very interesting. We've started from the high volcanic area where there's no vegetation growing. We're now going to drop down into an alpine region where you're going to see alpine flowers and short grasses. Then we drop down into tussock grasslands. Then we go into a beech forest. And finally, we get into a mixed forest, which I call the tropics, with lush tropical vegetation. There's no other hike in the world where in one day you're going to pass through 3 climactic zones and all of this change in vegetation. So we are dropping down from Blue Lake to the Ketitahi shelter, or the Ketitahi hut, and where there are facilities finally after about 4 hours of none. This is our last view of Red Crater and Blue Lake behind us. And looking forward, we get to see Lake Rotoera here, and back here is Lake Taupo to the north. We're going to have this view for the next 3 hours, and we're just going to continually have it growing larger and larger in our field of vision. Alpine flowers start to appear now, short grasses, hillsides starting to have short vegetation. The trail kind of like cuts across the slope, and it actually has a number of switchbacks back and forth to make the descent easier on us, but it adds to the length. You can start to see steam rising from the hillside. It's the Ketatahi hot springs, which are actually on private property. The trek crosses it, but as the case, hikers are advised not to leave the trek when you're going through here. There's the hut in the distance. Sometimes it seems to be above us, even though we're descending, because the trek goes down, then the trail goes up. And finally, here we are. Because people do hike the Tongariro crossing in the wintertime, this is a shelter. Obviously here people are stripping down and just enjoying the sun, but on the inside there is heat and there are beds. We signed the guest book and we continued. I'm now down to a golf shirt. Willard is down to his vest, and we're glad we have our shorts on. So we're heading now for the final stage down to the end of the track, the Ketatahi Road. We're now passing through the tussock grassland. You can see here there's a section where we're going up again. Here's the sign about private property, said, please don't go any closer to the hot springs. Looking back in the distance, there's the hut, and behind the hut, it's Mount Tamari. That is one of the peaks of the Tongariro mountain. And the interesting fact about that is that two years after I did this hike on August 6, 2012, it erupted. And the Tongariro crossing, you can see how close it comes to it, was closed for 3 weeks. Still in the grasslands. The hot springs do have water coming from them, and the creek, we cross it. If you take a look how nicely the people have done, and in terms of staircase, and to make the walk as nice as possible for the trampers. Stained rocks from the minerals in the water. Wildflowers are starting to appear now. Nicely colored rocks. Volcanic explosion craters on the hillside. The blue below us. The lake. Getting ever close to its level. Part of the lights trail through this boggy section. Look at the work they've done here to keep the soil from eroding and disappearing. Keeps the pebbles locked inside this plastic mesh. Suddenly, we're dropping into the forest, the beech forest at first, and now we're getting into the more tropical. You can see mosses, you can see ferns. You think you're in a jungle now. Rushing water, boardwalks, big trees, and suddenly, bam, you're at the Ketatahi car park. You can see the vehicles there waiting to pick people up, people waiting for their rides. You can see all the buses from Tapao there, public transportation to take people away, some private expeditions that people have signed up for. We've did it in just about 7 hours. And if you ever get a chance, please take it in. New Zealand is a wonderful country, and the crossing is a hike that you'll enjoy for sure.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I'm glad we all managed to get some nice weather for the end of the hike, and that gives some very scenic views. Okay, so why did we go to Bolivia? It's a country that neither my son or I had been to before. It's a place where the weather is pleasant in May. There's enough variety and interest for about 3 weeks. There was some good hiking, which is what I wanted to do. My son had spent a year in Spain, so he wanted to go somewhere where they spoke Spanish, and we wanted somewhere that wasn't too expensive. So this map shows where Bolivia is. So on the left-hand side, you can see we flew down to Peru, spent 1 day in Lima, and then took a short hop across to La Paz. And then on the way back, we flew to Colombia and flew back from Colombia. So the main map shows all of Bolivia. So you can see La Paz in the center. That's the place we kept on coming back to, surrounded by Peru, Brazil, Paraguay, and Chile. So the first trip we did was to Isla del Sol off to the left here. And then we took a trip down to the south to Sucre, to Potosi and Uyuni. And then we went up into the mountains to Uyuni, Potosi. And finally, we went up into the rainforest at Madidi. So this is one shot of Lima. It was just a beautiful spot overlooking the ocean with all these people paragliding. So it's quite a pleasant way to spend an evening. This is La Paz. And I really, really loved La Paz. I wasn't sure that I would, but the setting of the place is just unbelievable. It's way up at a really high altitude. It's 11,942 feet above sea level. So you get altitude sickness actually in the city. And it's a population of just under 1 million. This is one of the main squares. This is the Basilica on the right. And so there was a huge range of architecture, from colonial Spanish stuff to very modern stuff to some of shantytown stuff. This is the Houses of Parliament, so you can see it beautifully set out, very nice public square. There was a really fancy coffee shop just around the corner that would put Starbucks to shame. One of the fascinating things about La Paz is that the Swiss built a cable car system. So one of the ways that you can get around is by cable car. And this is actually going from downtown La Paz up to a place called El Alto, which is a suburb where the airport is. And that's just me hanging out in one of the cable cars. It was a really pleasant way to see the city. For a tourist, it was relatively cheap. The locals felt that it was expensive, but I think it was like $1 or $2 for a ride. This is just another picture of downtown La Paz. And just look at the bottom, the park that's just in the middle of the roadway there, and how carefully they've decorated that with topiary and gardening. It was really impressive. This is a place called the Witches Market, where they have various stalls that are selling supposedly dry llama fetuses and all sorts of herbal medications and things. And then these were some of the indigenous people. There's a huge indigenous population in Bolivia. And these are just some local women with their children and selling fruit on the street. And all very colorfully dressed, and they all had these fancy hats. So the first trip we decided to do was to go on a 2-day trip to Isla del Sol, to Lake Titicaca. So you can see in the background there is our bus, but there's one part of the trip where you have to cross a river. So they put the bus on the raft, and that isn't considered safe enough for the tourists. So the tourists all go across in a powerboat. So that was quite exciting. And this gets to a little place called Copacabana. And we had lunch there. And then we got on another boat. And that took us to Lake Titicaca. So Lake Titicaca is 12,507 feet above sea level. It's a huge lake. And I think it's the highest navigable waterway anywhere in the world. So when you get there, the island is sacred to the Incas, and they don't allow any cars on it. So it's very peaceful. And there's a staircase that you go up through a little town. And this is where we ended up spending the night. A very modest little hotel, but it was quite comfortable, and fantastic views. So we spent the afternoon doing some hiking. And there's an old Inca road that takes you the whole length of the island. We didn't have time to do all of it. In retrospect, I wish we'd spent more than 1 day here, and so we could have seen more of it, because the place was absolutely fantastic. There were clear views across the lake to the mainland, and a lot of agricultural work going on with all the terraces, and just a spectacular setting. And then that night we decided to go to a local restaurant that doesn't use electricity, and so we ate by candlelight, and the meal was very slow. So ironically, by the end of the evening, it was full dark, and we had to use the flashlights in our phone to find our way back to the hotel. So we then took our flight to do a little tour of the south. So I really love the airport of La Paz. They would let you walk out onto the airport, and there'd be like a whole line of planes lined up just like buses, and you would walk past them and try and work out which was the right one that you wanted to take. So this is the plane that took us to a place called Sucre. And so this is known for its white painted colonial buildings. It's a beautiful setting. And so again, we're still up at about 9,000 feet. So we didn't actually do any hiking here, but we did take a walking tour. And we had a local guide who took us to a local pub and got us slightly drunk, and then showed us some of the beautiful old buildings, one of the old churches. We went around the park, and then we went into the city market, which was really quite amazing. I don't think I've seen so many eggs anywhere in the world. And then there was a fruit market, all these fruits and vegetables. There's a cake place with a lot of cakes. Blood sugar went up just looking at it. And then there were some indigenous people who are selling corn and fresh vegetables. From there, we took a taxi for about 3 hours to Potosi. One of the nice things about South America is taxis are relatively cheap, so it's not actually a big deal to do a 3-hour taxi ride. So that was quite scenic, going through a sort of mountainous desert area. And we came to a place called Potosi, which is a small town. We're now up to 13,500 feet. Some beautiful colonial architecture there. And the reason why people go to Potosi is to see, hang on a sec, this place, which is called Cerro Rico. And so this is called the Rich Mountain, and that mountain is basically made out of silver. And all the Spanish bullion and gold ships from their colonial time came out of there, and it's still being mined. And the mines go like several stories up and down inside the mine, inside the mountain. And so this is my son Grant and myself, and we went down the mine. So I'm actually holding 2 sticks of dynamite in my hand, and my son is holding a little bag of cocoa leaves. So we bought those from the mine shop, and you leave them behind as a gift offering to the miners and to the local gods. You can also see this was 2016, but we're also already wearing N95 masks before they became fashionable because it's dusty in the mine. So we went for a little hike down the mine, and my son in particular didn't like it. It's a little bit scary, and he's a couple of inches taller than me, so he found it very difficult to get underneath the beams. So we didn't go very far. We went as far as this place here where there's a shrine, and we left our offerings to this god, the Tio, and then we moved on. This is just Potosi at night. So very beautiful colonial architecture. And then we headed off by bus a little bit further to Uyuni, heading down into some more desert. This was the place we stayed at Uyuni, which was a very nice little hotel with this lobby that was quite interesting. There's 2 reasons why people go to Uyuni. One is this place called the Train Cemetery. And for some reason, as they abandoned some of their train track and some of their train services, they just took the trains out into the desert and abandoned them and left them go rusty. And so the train cemetery has become quite a tourist attraction. And you can see all the people gathering around taking pictures. And then the other thing people go to is the salt flats. So there's a salt flat, which is 10,000 square kilometers. That's 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers, just of flat salt. And so we went out in like a 4-wheel drive SUV vehicle. And in the middle of it all, there's an island. And so we went for a little hike up the island, past all the cactuses. You can see all the tourist vehicles parked, and you can see how big the salt flat is. It's going way out into the horizon. And that's my son taking some pictures. And again, you can just see one of the car tracks across the salt, and you get an impression of just how big the place is. And then we went back to La Paz. So every time we went back to La Paz, we stayed in a different neighborhood. And so that was really good. We got a feel for the place. And then we did our real hiking trip. So this was like something out of National Geographic. We organized a private guided hike with Bolivian mountain guides. So they met us at our hotel with a four-wheel drive vehicle and a driver and a guide. We drove up through the suburbs to El Alto, where we picked up our chef. And then we drove out through some back roads and dirt roads up into the mountains to the Cordillera Real. And then they set us up with a picnic. And so a little picnic table, a little tablecloth with a traditional Bolivian brightly colored design on it. And that's all our luggage, our tents, food, our clothes and everything. And so they gave us a lunch, which turned out to be a packed lunch from a fast food restaurant in La Paz, but never mind. And then some mule drivers came over the hill and our guides loaded everything up onto the mules. And we started off hiking. So it was a beautiful sunny day. That's my sun just beginning to set off. And it began as a relatively easy hike through sort of tussock grasslands. There were wild llamas kicking around. And in fact, our guide, his father was a llama shepherd. And on the second day, he bumped into his father and they had a little chat and then went their separate ways. And we came to a lake and walked around the edge of the lake. So that was, again, nice, easy walking. Then we walked up a little bit higher and we came into closer to the mountains. And then we found a campsite. This is a lake called Chia Puta. So this is 15,000 feet above sea level and surrounded by mountains and with glaciers coming down almost all the way to the lake. And so our guides set up our tent there. And there was a little bit of infrastructure there. There was like a cookhouse for them to do their cooking in. And there was some washrooms and a few primitive shelters and a couple of other people camping. But we got a campsite more or less by ourselves. And next morning after breakfast, we headed off. You can just see down here in the bottom left-hand corner, this is the campsite that we stayed at. And just a few concrete buildings there. Beautiful lake with some nice reflections. And we headed off. It's looking a bit like the Tongariro crossing, to be honest. And at this stage, we met up with the only other people that we met on the trip. There was a group of 4 English hikers that were hiking without a local guide, which I thought was quite impressive because I never actually saw a map of this place. Our guide just knew it back the back of his hand. And I still haven't seen an actual map that you could use as a guide to find out where you were. And so we stopped for a little break here and talked to the English people. And then at this stage, the guide offers a choice. There was the option of going over this pass, which is at about 16,000 feet. Alternatively, we could go around it. And we decided we'd really spent enough time at high altitude and we went around it, which actually turned out to be a lot longer hike. And you can see as they're cutting across the side of the mountain. Then we got down. I actually had to Google image search to find out where some of these places were. This is Laguna Tuni. It's at almost 15,000 feet above sea level. So all this is high altitude. It's my son and our guide looking down at the route ahead. And eventually we came up to some fairly level ground with some cart tracks. And I think there'd been some mining work done in the area at one stage. And again, this is our cook and our guide setting up our tent for us. So it's very easy in that way, in that all the work was done for us. They did all the cooking for us. In the morning, we just got up, put our clothes on, ate our breakfast, and we started hiking, and everything else was done for us. This is the mountain we came to see. This is Huyana Potosi. This is 6,000 meters tall, almost 20,000 feet. It's apparently a relatively easy mountain to climb, but we didn't attempt to do that. That would have been a little bit too much for us, quite a lot too much for us. This is the next morning. These are our guides, our mule drivers, packing up all our stuff. And you can see they didn't spoil us. They didn't say skint us. There's a cooler there, there's some chairs. They basically just chucked everything on the back of these poor mules. I want you to notice, by the way, this red tent in the background. This tent was here before we arrived. and I'm going to point it out again later. So again, this is the place that we stayed. So there's a little bit of infrastructure, a little bit of a bungalow for the guides. This was the outhouse by the water, and there's a place where they could do some cooking and things like that. And there's a few llama milling around. And this was the toughest day because the guide sort of said, well, we just go over this ridge over there and then down the other side, and there'll be a car waiting for us. So I wasn't really expecting very much. And this was the first ridge we came to, and I thought, okay, we just climb over that ridge and down the other side and we'll be done. But it was completely a false summit. So we got up to the top of that ridge and there were some beautiful views. But also there was another ridge in the distance that we had to climb up. And I'm kind of hoping that my son is looking tired there and is resting his arms on his hiking poles. I was pretty exhausted by this stage. So the height of the pass is 16,728 feet. So that's the highest I've been in my life. I think it's the highest I'll ever be in my life. By the time we got up to this little last section here, I was like stopping every 5 or 6 paces. I had a little day pack with just a water and a camera, and I ended up giving that to the guide to carry because I wanted every bit of help I could get. So this is one of the most beautiful views I've ever seen in my life, because this was the road that was going to take us back to La Paz. We'd done it, we'd made it to the top of the pass. And so you can just see over the left-hand side, there's a little trail that takes you down. And where that trail meets the road is where the van came, and we all got back in the van and they drove us back to La Paz. So that was the big hiking part of the trip, but we had one little adventure left to do, and that was to go into the rainforest. So we took this plane, which is the smallest commercial plane I've ever been on, I think. This is the inside of the plane. You can see there was no food service or hostess or anything like that. There was just a pilot and the co-pilot, and you could actually look through the length of the plane and see them. It was really scary. It was only about an hour-long flight, but this is where we were flying. We were flying over the Andes. And so there's an enormous amount of turbulence. And I could just imagine the headlines, you know, Canadian tourists killed in flight over Andes. So this is the mountain we looked at last time. This is Hayuna Potosi. And we could see it, and I think you can maybe make it out just here. That's the campground. And we could actually see, I think it's here, the orange tent I pointed out previously. So that was the coolest part of the flight. So we ended up in a little place called Varenabanque, which is only 900 feet above sea level. And it really felt like the end of the earth. It only has a population of 15,000 people. This was the biggest building in town. Pretty much everybody went around on motorbikes. But it actually had one of the nicest hotels I've ever been to. So this was the hotel we stayed at there. And the thing I loved about this was that they recognized that everybody who'd come here had either spent 12 hours on a bus or they'd done this scary flight. So as soon as we arrived and said who we were, they immediately gave us the room keys and said, go to your room, you know, have a shower, get changed, unpack. When you're ready, come back to the reception and we'll check you in. And so that's what we did. We relaxed, cleaned up, came back to the reception. They sat us down at the coffee table. They gave us some lemonade and we checked in. And I thought, why doesn't every hotel in the world do this? It was just so civilized. The next morning, we were going up to Madidi Jungle Lodge. So this is Grant waiting for, this is our boat. Boat would take us about 2 or 3 hours up a little tributary of the Amazon. So this is the waterway we went up. When we got there, there's this thing, this is a tapir, which I don't think I'd ever heard of before, but it's a very friendly animal, and it would just like hang out by the boat, and later on it would come walk with us. And I think it's a vegetarian animal, but it was kind of cute, about the size of a donkey. That's my son resting at the Madidi Lodge. And then they took us through some walks through the rainforest. This was through their grounds, and then they took us further afield. You can just see the river there sort of breaking down all the bank of the soil here. This is me by one of the big trees in the rainforest. This I was chuffed about because I'd only really read about this in books. These are leafcutter ants. And so they cut little bits of leaf off, and you can see them carrying the leaf backwards and forwards, and they bring them back to their nest. And this is my son fishing. And what do you catch in the Amazon rainforest? You catch piranhas. And so this is a little baby piranha, and you can just see the bottom row of teeth there looking really quite sharp and vicious. And on the way back, we did a little detour to a cliff where there's these parakeets nesting. And so that was the end of the trip. We came back to La Paz and we had a final day. We had nothing particularly planned to do, and they put on a parade for us. And this was just unbelievable. These men and women danced for like 5 or 6 hours from one end of town to the others. You can see the girls are dancing in like boots with high heels. The men are dancing in these really fancy monkey costumes. They got big feather headdresses. And I think they were absolutely exhausted. But at the end of the day, everybody went out and partied.